Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're going to be looking at the top 8 lists from all the divisions of the Nashville 2018 Pokemon World Championships. I feel like although, it's post-rotation now and people may not care so much about the lists, I think it's very important to get into the mindset of some of these very successful players at the top of the game and how they were able to succeed at this World Championships, because it's going to give us great insight into what every deck needs in general in order to perform at the highest level, and also give us some hints into the post-rotation meta and what sort of survives and what may change and adapt, etc. So let's go down into the Masters Division, and I'll kick off with our new world champion, Robin Schulz, from Germany, and he played Zora Garb. And you can see the full list here. These are all able to be found on the official Pokemon website, of course. He played a 4-4 Zoroark line, as is customary, and he played a 2 Trash Launch 1 Garbatoxin Garbodor line. Again, a very simple count that we see all over the place. Trash Launch Garbodor, very potent for the new Rayquaza deck that popped up, way more than expected in my opinion, at the World Championships. Trash Launch being a very good counter to that deck, also giving you tight coverage against Buzzwole most importantly, so very, very good attacker in general that we've seen throughout the season. Garbatoxin as well, very good for ability-focused decks like Malamar, which we actually saw in the final, of course. Also very good for Zoroark mirror matches to deny the opponent their use of abilities at times, so Garbatoxin also very good for disruption. We saw 3 Acid Spray Trubbish, which actually became a big factor in one of Robin's games against Burt Walters, where he was able to flip heads. I think it was actually on the big Acid Spray Garbodor, but having this attack in addition can sometimes remove energies from opponents and make life difficult for them. We saw 3 Tapu Lele and 1 Kartana GX. Now, Robin actually didn't play any Ultra Balls, so he had no way to search this Kartana out, but the Slice Off provides a couple... Well, it provides a reusable use of Enhanced Hammer, basically, because he does play a Rescue Stretcher, which you can see down here. Also, it's 20 damage in general because of Riotous Beating. It's a nice Pokemon to just slap onto the bench. And at the same time, it gives you a couple of cool attacks. The Blade GX attack is available thanks to these unit energies that he plays. And the Gale Blade also is something you can do. If you're going to do that Blade GX attack, you can then sponge a hit sometimes with your Kartana and then go into the Gale Blade to actually reset it as well and undo some damage the opponent's done for some pseudo healing, which is also pretty cool. So Kartana, we've seen in some of the successful Zora Garb lists. I think the NAIC list played one, so definitely a fairly standard Pokemon line. I think the biggest surprise here, if anything, is that we didn't see any tech non-GX Pokemon. No use of Mewtwo from Evolutions, no use of Latios either, or Latias, I can't remember which one it is. The Latios, right, is the psychic one that does 30-30. And that was sort of popularized with those NAIC lists with Stefan Ivanov, but that's not been followed through here. Robin's just gone for the most simplistic Pokemon line possible. The energy count as well, very standard. 4 DC, 3 unit. There was some debate whether or not to play basic Psychic Energy now and cut the units because of fear of Zoro control, how many Enhanced Hammers they're going to be playing and stuff like that. But Robin stuck with his guns and just played the 3 copies of unit energy. For supporters, he played 4 copies of N to make him very nice and defensive alongside this Garbodor and Trash Launch. I think is one of the big factors why he did so well personally. Always having access to N is going to be a really big deal for you, as well as being a reasonable consistency card in the early game. 3 copies of Bridget alongside 3 Lele and 4 Treasure gave him very good outs to get his Zoruas on board straight away, as well as Trubbishes. Just 2 copies of Guzma, which is quite interesting actually. I think this was more common in other Zoroark builds because they're used to having trade online for the entire game. Things like Sauropod were adapting to it because they were also playing Counter Catcher. So it's interesting to see a very thin line of the Guzmas. One of the small cheeky cuts that he had to make in his list, I think, in order to have more consistency cards like the Evo Soda in the 3 count, which is something that you don't always see in Zora Garb. Typically, we saw 1 Evo Soda at times. So trimming the Guzma count is one of the only things that I see where he sort of cut corners. 1 Cynthia, 1 Sycamore, 2 Parallel City, 4 Puzzle of Time, 4 Mysterious Treasure is a big decision in his list as well. I said how it can be very nice for the Bridget and Lele. It's also very good for getting out your Garbodor. Most notably though, it can't get out your Zoroark. Robin decided to play 4 Treasure instead of Ultra Balls altogether because the discards were so painful with Zoroark, and he mitigated the fact that he couldn't find his Zoroarks by having 3 Evo Soda. So he still had a lot of outs to find them. The treasures then became tradable cards for him anyway, which is pretty much how Ultra Ball worked in Zoroark decks, right? You would use Ultra Ball to either get you Lele, or to get you one of your first Zoroarks to get you rolling, and then the other ones become fodder because your discards are too painful. Robin then took the approach of just saying, you know what, Treasure is a cheaper discard in the opening turns, so that's better for me, and it can search out my Garbodor stuff anyway, so if I just have a high Evo Soda count, I'm not going to get punished for having no Ultra Ball. And I think it was, overall, really successful, as you can see. So that's where we see the split. 3 copies of Field Blower, so he can always get rid of his own tools and get rid of opposing parallels, which is a big deal. 3 copies of Floatstone, 2 Choice Band, obviously damage buff, and also Vital Tools for Toxin. 1 copy of the Enhanced Hammer alongside the Kartana. 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher, which can recycle our Garbodor pieces and any Zoro pieces, as well as that Kartana as well. And the Town Map is a Schultz special, as we've seen both Philip and Robin play this card now to amazing finishes. And I think it is actually a very vital card for this list, believe it or not. It's very good in combination with Galvatox and Garbodor, because some of the ways that you can lose is that you can get yourself stuck, and especially because you're shutting off your own trade, you can not have the means of finishing off a game if you put your own Toxin into play in the late game, even though you need it in the game just so your opponent can't win. So having a Town Map means that you can then find yourself vital pieces like more supporter cards to draw you out of your own funk. It can get you into Field Blower, which gets you back into trade, or it can get you things like energy cards just to straight up win the game. So I think the Town Map is actually a very nice card and definitely warrants the slot in here, as we saw Robin use it to perfection in his games. So very nice card there. Next up, we'll have a look at Jeff Kolenk's very interesting Malamar builds. This is really a surprise for me. I thought that Malamar was poorly positioned going into Worlds, except for the fact that you can feast on Buzzwole variants, and a big other factor is that Marshadow can actually survive against Zoro Control. So by playing 2 Marshadow GX, he was heavily targeting Zoro Control, because many of them weren't playing Choice Band. There were some that played Choice Band just because they played Sylveon EX, but there were others that just simply don't. And in those matchups, Marshadow absolutely wrecks them, because they have no other way to deal with Marshadow other than putting down a Mew, which then they can respond anyway quite easily, and it's a win-win situation. So I think part of Jeff's success is the fact that he targeted Zoro Control heavily. Zoro Control wasn't played hugely day 1, but we knew that it would be a big day 2 play, and I know that Jeff played a few of them and was able to beat them convincingly. And I think the 2 Marshadow was a testament to that, really. Some other interesting cards that he played: 1 Lunala Prism Star, pretty nice non-GX, bulky attacker. I think we actually saw this against Rayquaza, against Pedro in the top 4 game. Mimikyu being able to copycat some interesting and powerful attacks. Giratina to help you out against Greninja and also give you another non-GX attacker. Guru to help you instruct out of ends. 1 copy of Tapu Lele only is very low for a Malamar list, but at the same time, his bench spaces are going to be dedicated to other things like the Guru and some of his tech attackers. Only 1 copy of both Necrozma and Dawnwing's Necrozma GX, which have previously been like highlights of the deck, really. We've seen these in 2 counts, sometimes even higher with Necrozma GX. So Jeff really making the statement that it's a problem to have Dawnwings out against Zoroark players. It's better in the discard pile, so Marshadow can copy it. And Necrozma as well, weak to Mew, which is a problem, but can still blow things up. So it is weak to prizing stuff, no doubt, but having a high Marshadow and then from there a non-GX focus could have been one of the ways that Jeff was able to keep up against a lot of aggressive decks. So going thin on the non-GX route, I actually think was a reasonable call for this tournament, so bear that in mind. Still 1 copy of Mewtwo GX, so Marshadow is able to copy a whole bunch of things here. Mewtwo, of course, very good in Mirror, also very good at dealing with Lycanroc GX alongside that Mimikyu, which can also do the same thing. So he had a lot of answers for some popular cards in the format, so props to Jeff for coming up with a very interesting Pokemon line, which we basically haven't seen before in Malamar, that ended up working out for him. The craziness doesn't stop there. 10 Psychic Energy, of course, but the support accounts are wild, let me tell you. When I saw this, my mind was like blown. Jeff's playing no N in his list. That's right, a list came second at Worlds without playing any copies of N, and I thought the day would never come. N is such an integral card for so many reasons. Jeff just played none, right? Like, surely, this is where I just lose my head, because I feel like it would always have more value than a 4th Cynthia, but the only real thing I can say is that when Malamar builds this board of a bunch of them, it's going to be the aggressor, and it's not going to want to be behind. So even if you draw like an N off your opponent hitting you with N, you're not going to be too pleased, whereas having some of these more power draw cards may get you into game more often. So I think the mentality of being the aggressor is sort of the tail of his list here. 4 Sycamore, obviously very good for dumping your energy cards. 4 Cynthia to support this and just have more draw. 3 copies of Guzma, another big surprise from me. I just said how it wants to be the aggressor in many situations. Only having 1 Lele and 3 Guzma gives him very low odds to actually close games, which is a little bit surprising for me. Now, he can blow stuff up in the active, of course, but if they're non-GXs, that's going to be a problem for you. So, surprised there's only 3 Guzma here. 1 copy of Lily as well. Really nice early game supporter card, but from there, it's not quite as good as anything else. So, again, kind of surprising to see this. 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Treasure. That means that he's not playing any Bridget either. Bridget is also a card that we've seen plenty of in the Malamar builds. Choosing not to play it, I mean, because this does have this much Ball Search, it's actually fine to not play Bridget. It's not mandatory. I think the N is the biggest thing here, and only playing 3 Guzma. Going to be playing the 4-4. 4 Floatstone. Now, bear in mind, he only plays 1 Dawn Wings, so that's kind of more reasonable. Typically, we see just 3 Floatstone and a second Dawn Wings, but if he doesn't want to put Dawn Wings down against Zoroark, that's kind of understandable. 3 copies of Acrobike helps him motor through the deck a little bit quicker and get those Psych Energies once again into the discard pile, so inserting a nice returning card into the format, into this list, using it very nicely for some aggro draw, I think was a good call. It did mean that he played more items, which was bad against Trashalanche, but he's already so bad against Garbodor anyway that I think he's just kind of all in with his Acrobikes. 2 copies of Field Blower, pretty nice for parallel and stuff like that. So again, pretty mandatory call. And another huge decision that Jeff made was to play only 2 copies of Max Elixir. This is usually a 3 of, so some really interesting counts going on. It would take me a few games to get my head around why he only plays 2 Elixir. I would personally say it's pretty weak against Buzzrock, only playing the 2. But at the same time, you're playing 3 Acrobike to try and get a bunch of energy in the bin early so that your multiple Malamars are working quickly. So it may just be something that I have to test out before I discredit it. You know, it got second at Worlds, so it can't be that bad, right? But just it's just a real different approach to Malamar that we've ever seen. Rounding off with 1 Stretcher, I think is kind of reasonable as well with the amount of discard that we have in the deck. So very creative list of Malamar with that high Marshadow count. Trying to capitalize on Zora Control, I think, is the big takeaway point here. Marshadow very good at punishing those decks, and I think he, like I said, he played a few of them on the day. Your big auto loss, I would say, is Zora Garb. We saw that in the final. We saw how far out of reach it was for him. And that's why I thought overall Malamar was a kind of risky play, because, you know, Zora Garb won the NAIC and was well poised to continue to do well. Did well in day 1, obviously did well in day 2. So, I mean, it's just a really ballsy play, I think. And even with some of these wacky accounts, I just don't think it was going to be able to overcome that matchup ever. And that was eventually Jeff's undoing. On to some of the other finalist decks. We have Clive playing a Zygarde Lycanroc deck. This sort of had murmurs in some smaller tournaments, definitely in some more foreign tournaments, definitely in Singapore. I believe this won a regional or a special event. So it's a deck that was popular there, has kind of been tinkered around with in smaller events in America, but never really hit the big stage until now, where we see Big Daddy Zygarde GX just being a huge pain for a bunch of other options out there. Now, Galissapod GX was one of the things keeping this deck in check. Because of Zora Control and Zora Garb being so popular, that deck kind of diminished and wasn't very popular at Worlds. And this really did open the door for Zygarde to be very, very potent. And because we have the whole fighting package and we're not weak to Psychic, Zoroark decks really hate to see this guy. I'll be honest, this is just really not what you want to come up against if you're a Zoroark player. Even with things like Enhanced Hammer, I just feel like Zygarde GX is such a pain. So much hit points, easily one-hit KO stuff. Even Cell Connected can do it, thanks to the Regirock EX that he plays alongside the Diancie. So with Choice Band, these guys on the board, you can actually Cell Connector for knockouts against Zoroark. And at the very least, you're putting early pressure against things like Rayquaza and stuff like that. So really, really powerful GX attacker. I wonder if we'll see more of this going into the new format. We are playing the 2-2 Lycanroc. We've seen how potent this is alongside Buzzwole. One Lele, once again, the Instructor Rangaroo. Oh, my boy. He's in so many of these top 8 Worlds decks. I feel so justified in loving it for this long. One Buzz GX and one Baby Buzzwole as well for that Sledgehammer turn. And I've already mentioned how this Regirock and Diancie can fix a lot of numbers. 16 energy is an absolute mammoth amount, but you want to see them a lot so that you can discard them early for your Zygarde GX. The basic energies especially. DC as well, very important for your Zygarde, and the strong energy can push, once again, some really cool numbers for you. 4 copies of Sycamore, 3 copies of Guzma, 3 N, 2 Cynthia, 4 Stadiums total. Of course, they are important for your Verdict. Oh no, they're not important for Verdict GX because they're normally for Bonnie, but Bonnie's not in here. He's not full Zygarde, right? He's not gone all in. He's just playing Zygarde because it's weak to Grass and not Psychic. He plays 2 Scorched Earth to help you get those energies in the bin and to get you drawing a little bit more without the use of item cards, which is cool. 2 Brooklet still to get your dudes into play. 4 Ultra, 3 Choice, 3 Max Elixir as his only provider of energy acceleration. Again, sometimes we see 4 copies when you see Zygarde, but because he is using the partner of Lycanroc, as we've seen with Buzzrock, a lot of the time you just need to slap 1 onto your Rockruff and you'll be good. Lycanroc can hard carry you sometimes. 3 copies of Floatstone, 1 copy of that trusty Field Blower as well, and 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher. So definitely a really interesting take on this list. Normally you'll see Octillery alongside these sorts of fighting decks just because of the synergy of Brooklet, but making this space for a Rangaroo meant that he could keep this Lycanroc as a really powerful attacker that I think overall, like it did underperform at Worlds, at least in Masters, but a lot of the other age divisions, I think especially Juniors, Buzzrock did insane. And Lycanroc is still one of the most powerful cards, especially now that a bunch of stuff has rotated. One of the most powerful cards we have in the standard format right now. And I think really the tale is that Zoroark was so potent at Worlds that just being a fighting deck that isn't weak to Mew predominantly just does such a huge shift. And at the same time, some people just may not know what to do against a well-timed Verdict GX. Landsrath also gets into those big one-hit KOs as well, alongside Choice Band Diancie. So really, Clive showed us the way here with Zygarde. Very powerful deck and really good call on the day, I think. Just making the statement that no one has answers to this guy in general. My boy Pedro from Spain, he was also a semi-finalist with his Rayquaza GX deck. And we'll start to see a few variations of Rayquaza now, because a lot of them did do well. Pedro's build did play 2 copies of the Let Loose Marshadow. This was really the card of the tournament, I think, that made Rayquaza as good as it was. I faced against a couple that were heavy on Marshadow in day 1, and this was again adopted into some of these day 2 lists. So powerful alongside Mysterious Treasure to search this out. Basically, you can just cheese people early on. If you have a crazy turn 1 explosion with your Rayquaza, you get 1 or 2 down, then you Sycamore, then you empty that hand with elixirs and stuff, and then you Marshadow at the end of that, giving your opponent just 4 cards, and also sometimes plussing you at the same time is just very, very powerful. And this card really was very good for Worlds, and specifically alongside Rayquaza, something that I initially overlooked. I remember in our top 10 list, I talked about Red Card, and the main reason I liked Red Card over Marshadow was because you didn't need to fill up your bench spaces, but I guess that doesn't matter as much. So Marshadow, really, really cool call. 1 copy of Tapu Lele is crazy in my opinion, but I mean, Pedro made it work. I definitely would I mean, personally, I probably would have flip-flopped the Marshadow Lele counts, but hey, you know, Marshadow is a good card at the end of the day, and it's much better to lead a Marshadow than a Lele, so it is what it is. One copy of the god himself, Instructor Rangaroo, to help you out against late game ends, and one copy of Xurkitree GX. I think this was more a tech card from Pedro after seeing day one, because we saw the Garbodor Baby Buzzwole Shrine deck list, and Rayquaza really struggles against that, but Xurkitree walls it completely. A lot of the Baby Buzz Garb Shrine decks weren't playing Toxin. If they didn't play Toxin, they just lost to Xurkitree because of its Flashing Head ability. So I think rather than this just being an all-round good card, I think this could have been the 60th card that Pedro squeezed into his list after seeing what was panning out in day one. We saw the very often seen 7/7 split of energy. 4 Guzma, 4 Sycamore, 4 Treasure, 4 Puzzle of Time. Now, this is a big story as well for Rayquaza. This wasn't something that initially jumped out to me as something that was obvious in Ray, but is also something that just really helps you pop off as Rayquaza. If you have, basically, you're hoping to get 2 puzzles once, right? If you get 4, you've had an insane run. If you get 2 at one time, you're going to be able to get a really nice turn rolling for you. So even though you're playing 4 copies, you're doing it with the intention, really, of just getting it off once, and it's just going to be a huge swing for you. Either you're getting more max elixirs, so that you can just get even more energy on the board and have an insane turn, or you're going to have that turn where you can just go like Rayquaza Guzma, or recover an important piece that you discarded throughout the game. So I think Puzzle's a really creative and powerful option in this deck that, again, it isn't one that was immediately obvious in Ray, and was something that I never tested with Ray. So it's really cool that he was able to come across this and make it work for him. 4 copies of Elixir, 3 Acrobike, 3 Choice Band as his tool of choice. Just trying to be as aggressive as possible against Zoroark players. I think one of the big question marks for Rayquaza was, do I play Fury Belt for Buzzwole and for things like Greninja and all this other like fringe stuff? Do I play Choice Band just so I can pound through my Zoroark opponents? Or do I play Wishful Baton and pray that people miss Field Blower early, or that I can just get 1 proc and it's going to keep my energy for the entire game? Pedro went for the Choice Band approach, just trying to go smack, smack, smack as quickly as possible, because that's what Rayquaza is best at doing. 2 copies of Ultra Ball alongside these 4 treasures is absolutely fine. 2 Field Blowers for getting rid of opposing tools, maybe in mirror matches for Rayquaza especially. Also good for getting rid of tools on Garbodors and such, and getting rid of Parallel City, because we are trying to spam as many Rayquazas on the board as possible. 2 copies of Rescue Stretcher, going to recycle your Rays, of course, and Marshadow, and any of your other one-offs that happen to hit the bin with Sycamore or with your Acrobikes. Only 2 copies of Floatstone. Sometimes we see a lot more, potentially a weakness of his list, because the Rayquazas are so chunky, and it's important to move your active one, especially if you start it, so that you can get turned to attacks off. So kind of a risk there, just playing the 2 copies. 1 Escape Rope to also be the 3rd switching card. This means that you don't auto-lose to Jolteon EX, which is pretty cool. You can rope Guzma and actually get a KO. I know a lot of the Japanese players and a few of the American players as well were teching in the Jolteon EX in Rayquaza to try and auto-win. The Escape Rope means that they don't auto, or that Pedro doesn't auto-lose, and in general, it's a card that you can reload with Puzzle if you just have an insanely lucky turn to try and reuse it as well. So I guess that's the 3rd switching card where I'm kind of concerned when I just see the 2 Floatstone. It is sort of mitigated by the 1 copy of Escape Rope. Again, this may have been an adjustment that he made after looking at the day 1 meta and seeing a few random Jolteon EXs around the tables. That is the beauty of being immediately into day 2. He was able to make some of these metacool cards like Rope, like Circuitry, after seeing the day 1 field. 1 copy of Lily, because the deck can thin its hand very easily, and you get an insane turn 1, which is awesome. And alongside his 2 Rescue Stretchers, he's going to play 1 copy of Super Odd for that additional reload, which is all important. So Pedro, you know, he's no stranger to the main stage. He's done well at Internats before, and now doing well at Worlds. Not quite able to take it all the way, but I think his list very, very, again, unique by showing how powerful Puzzle of Time can be in the list, and also making some cool tech decisions on the day so that he was covered against a few scarce matchups that he saw in that day 1 field. On to Eric Smith from Rare Candy. You can obviously check him out. He also was able to make the breakthrough with Rayquaza. Playing the 4 Ray, 2 Lele, 1 Coco GX, as we saw Tapu Thunder being a nice one-hit KO option against a few different things. 1 Latios Prism, that's one thing to note of Pedro's list actually, that he'd played no Latios at all. He's all in on speed. Eric is going to be a little bit more conservative by having a Latias Prism start in there, and 1 copy of that Let Loose Marshadow once again, pulling its weight here. Eric choosing not to play the King Oranguru, but I'll let him off for that. 14 energy as well, so everyone pretty much landed on those counts. 4 Sycamore, 4 Guzma, 3 Cynthia, 2 N, 4 Treasure, 4 Elixir, 3 Ultra Ball, 3 Fighting Fury Belts in Eric's list again, so he was looking more at the Buzzwole matchup and just trying to keep your Big Daddy Rayquazas alive for longer so that you can do more damage in the long run. 3 Floatstone, 2 Field Blur, 1 Super Rod, only 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher, 1 Palpad, which is again something that Pedro didn't actually play, but of course his puzzles take up those sorts of slots. Palpad I really like in Rayquaza. I don't think I would have played puzzles, but I've never played with them, so I can't just outright call them bad. But I think Eric's list is way more standard. Like, this is a Rayquaza list that you could have expected going into day one. I think potentially the Marshadow was something not a lot of people expected, and I would normally hope to see a Oranguru in their Pokemon counts, but everything else looks like bread and butter standard Rayquaza. 2 Parallel City as well can also really help against the Zoroark players, also helps out against the Garbodor players because they are limited to the amount that they can keep on the board. So Parallel, good in a bunch of situations, and I think a lot of Rayquazas decided to play Parallel. I know I faced a couple that did play it, so I don't think Pedro actually played any Stadium at all. He was just playing Blowers, so I imagine Pedro's is a slightly faster build, but Eric's is pretty much bread and butter, just simple. I think the only surprise here is that he plays no Acrobikes at all, so I think Pedro's is the faster build, and also with those Choice Band gives him a lot more pace than Eric, but I think this is pretty much like a standard build that you would expect to see from Rayquaza, and I feel like a few people would have played against a list similar to this in day 1 or 2. Then we have Nicolas Galvez from Chile. He's playing a fairly standard Buzzrock. He's playing 3 Baby, 2 Big Daddy Buzz, 2/2 Lycanroc, a 2/1 Octillery line, which I'm always against, but we've seen more and more with Pram playing it and Bert playing it as well in the Valencia special. 1 Lele and 1 Diancie. 14 energy, 9 basic, and then 4 strong, as well as 1 beast instead of 10 and 3. So a bit more aggressive in the special energy department. 4 Sycamore, 4 Guzma, 2 Cynthia, 2 N. So this is again cookie cutter, very basic list. I think all of these counts are very basic. This could actually just be the list that Pram played at the NAIC, and the one that Bert played and won with at Valencia. I think genuinely this is just that 60 card list. So a very basic, well-trusted, like, standard list that just did well. And I think it's really good to see that Buzzrock did this well, because it's a testament to how good it's been all season. So I wouldn't mind if this was a deck that got printed for Worlds alongside Robin's, but obviously I want to see Pedro or Eric's Rayquaza list get printed. I think that would be awesome. Then we see the third Rayquaza build from Sciuto. He's playing 4 Ray, 2 Lele, 1 Coco, 1 Latias, and 1 Oranguru. So he's playing no Marshadow, but he's playing the Guru instead. He's actually playing an extra Grass Energy. Just, why not? More odds of hitting your Elixirs and more odds of getting them in the bin, I guess. We're seeing a fairly standard counter supporters at this point. He's also playing Parallel. All those Elixirs, Ultra Balls, Floats, Stretchers. He's choosing to play Choice Band, only as a 2 copy and 1 copy of Fighting Fury Belt. So best of both worlds, I guess. You can catch people by surprise, I imagine, if you play one of them and then play the other one later. And 1 copy of Palpad. So I think Sciuto as well. We've got 3 very different schools of thought with our different Rayquaza builds at Worlds, but all of them were aggressive. 2 of the 3 playing Choice Band, and 2 of the 3 playing Fury Belt as well, I guess. So it feels like the Wishful Baton dream was not the way to play this deck. It was more about trying to get Rayquazas rolling as quickly as possible and getting smacking in the face. Pedro, the only man to play the puzzles. But from there, I think we see a lot of the same stuff in all 3 of these lists. So well done to Sciuto as well, doing well with the Rayquaza list. And finally, for Masters, we have Brian Miller from the US playing Sauropod of all things. I stated earlier that I didn't think it was a potentially good play for this tournament because of the amount of Zora Lock that was expected, as well as Zora Garb. But we see here that Sauropod made it to the top 8. And again, it's a fairly simple list. 4-4, 3-2, 3 Lele, 1 Mew, 1 Oranguru. This is the Pokemon line that we've become accustomed to over the most recent months. 7 energy as well, very standard. The 4 copies of Bridget, which everyone, me especially, loves. 3 copies of Guzma, 3 N, 1 Sycamore, 1 Cynthia, 1 Acerola. 3 copies of Parallel City, so kind of a throwback to the NAIC lists with Jimmy Pendarvis. 4 copies of Puzzle, 4 Ultra Ball, 3 Evo Soda, so just trying to be simple, consistent, as we know and love. 3 copies of Field Blower, I think was a great call from him. As I just mentioned, there's going to be Zora Lock, there's going to be Zora Garb. Having multiple blowers for this is going to be awesome for you. Obviously for parallels and for floatstones and such. And also having the Gliscopod against Garbodor is really, really good. 2 float, 1 choice, 1 counter catcher, 1 max potion. So I think this is, I think it's a perfect Sauropod really for this tournament. I can't discredit this in any way. I'm personally not a fan of playing Sycamore in my Sauropod list, but that's a preference call. Like, it would basically just be a Mallow or a Cynthia based on what I wanted to see. I think that's the only real card that stands out at me, the fact that there's no Mallow whatsoever. But other than that, I feel like this is pretty much a perfect Sauropod. And again, I love that it's a homage to this deck that's done so well way back at the London Internats now. That feels like a million miles away from this format. But some cute adjustments here. The 3rd Field Blower, choosing to make the space for it, I think is a really good call. The 1 counter catcher, keeping up with the times, I think is overall really good. So I think I'm going to end it here because I've been talking for ages and I want to give seniors and juniors a lot of justification as well. So I'll move on to those in the next couple of videos, guys. I hope you enjoyed my breakdown of the top 8 of the Masters, and we'll go on to the other categories in a minute. Cheers.